Hey, thanks so much for joining us today. We're picking up a press release live going on right now. Julian Assange freed from prison. In this episode, we're going to be talking about what it means for the U.S. empire. Joining me today is John Richardson, and we're going to get back to the press release right now. Welcome, John.
I'm not hearing the audio.
You're not getting audio? Okay, hang on one second. Let me fix that. We fix that in a second. Fix that in a second here. I see what my problem is. Hang on. Fix that. We'll get that in a second, folks. Thanks for standing by. Yeah, incredible news today. Incredible news yesterday, I guess. Or was it yesterday or Monday? Julian Assange free from prison. And, you know, John and I, and Keith, we discussed this. We discussed this earlier. We discussed, we had a podcast where we discussed sort of the complications with using the Espionage Act against a person who's not a U.S. person here. What's going on here? They're not letting me play this here. Hang on one second, folks. We'll be getting this.
I think you need to.
Yeah, it has a funky little way of doing this here. I gotta just get this here. And
you need to click on the Twitter thing to get audio to begin.
Yeah. So let me see. I should have this now.
Our place, so that our family would be a family before he can speak again.
Oh, I see. Oh, it's pretty annoying. I only could share a Chrome feed. Hang on one second, John. Can you just entertain us while I get this up here?
Sorry, what's that?
Can you entertain us a little bit while I am just dealing with our technical issues here?
In the legal case.
Yeah. So, you know, this is when the history of the 21st century in the United States in particular is written. This episode, this Julian Assange thing, is going to be more than a footnote, because through this prosecution, I believe that the United States has lost any shred of moral credibility at all, any shred. And it's really the loss of moral credibility of the United States on the world stage that is, you know, I think going to be the single biggest influencer in, you know, the alignment of power in the 21st century. You know, on Monday, as everybody knows, on Monday, Julian agreed to plead guilty to one count of something or other in exchange for his release. And I don't believe that there's a single person on the planet who sees this as anything but a resounding and terrible loss for the credibility of the U.S. government.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't say that there's any winners here, that's for sure. But history will show the United States as by far the biggest loser here.
I agree with that. And I think the United States is the big loser, because we have to remember the reaction to Julian Assange was extreme. It was incredibly extreme and unique and unprecedented, as one of his attorneys just said, using the Espionage Act as in the way that they did before. It was just mentioned before we got on. I do have good news. I do have the tab up. I should be able to get the audio right now. Also share tab audio. Yes, I do want to share tab audio. There we go. Okay. So this should be coming through now. Okay. You can just hear that. Great. All right. Finally. All right. Here we go. So here we are. We're picking up. Just let me know how the levels are between our us and the Twitter feed. So here we are. We're picking up. Who do we have here, John?
The fact that Julian's been
That is Jennifer Robinson,
every year
uh,
since the publication.
Julian's main
So to
lawyer,
suggest this is not in the public interest.
Australian lawyer for the last
I
whatever,
don't understand the basis
Okay.
in which they could
however
possibly
this is going
suggest
on.
that.
Wow.
And so-
Okay. We have quite an audience right now. Incredible. So thank you everyone for joining us today as we're going through this. You know, again, John and I were talking about the impact of Julian Assange and how the parallels show the U.S. empire will do anything. You know, this is a tax channel, and we talk about tax issues all the time. And questions come up: why is the tax system so abusive? Why is it so abusive? And the reason why is because of the American empire, the American empire that would incarcerate someone for telling the truth. For telling the truth about what the American empire is exactly the American empire that would foist this tax system upon us, which is something we never asked for, and is just something that is unconscionable. We've been conditioned to accept it as inevitable, but it is, as we've been seeing, and that this is what's exciting for me, is that people are waking up to what our government actually is, and things start to make a little bit more sense. So now, who do we have here, John?
Well, that is Stella Assange, Julian Assange's wife, who
All right.
actually is apparently a lawyer as well.
Julian needs time to recover, to get used to freedom.
Oh, they're having some problems with that. By me, that's
Someone told me yesterday who had been through something and quickly.
Jen, as one of my colleagues mentioned the Podesta files earlier, I think he may not have read them. Could you, now you have the opportunity, just remind us of how they actually reformed the DNC and the corruption within? The Podesta files were really good for the Democratic National Congress, yes?
Look, there's clearly public interest in the DNC materials that was released by WikiLeaks, and in terms of the legality of those publications, there's a US court decision showing that it had the highest possible protection of First Amendment. So from a principle, publications absolutely protected by the First Amendment, as US courts have found.
Again, are there any post-release conditions during parole periods? The US has said that it's banned from returning to certain within the US.
I can hear the question.
And can you and Barry give us a sense of the negotiation with the DOJ, particularly given Julian's strong view that he was not guilty of a crime?
I think it's best Barry speaks to the terms of the plea deal.
There are absolutely no restrictions on Julian. The case against him is over. There is no gag order. There are no other restrictions. He is going to be able to go back to whatever life he chooses to build with Stella and his family. The negotiations were a protracted process that went on for several months, sort of in fits and starts. We were not close to any sort of a resolution until a few weeks ago, when the Department of Justice re-engaged, and there have been very intense negotiations over the last few weeks. One thing we were very clear about,
Yeah, so-
was that any resolution.
So the U.S. government brought this about. They wanted this resolution.
Would be free. That he was not going to do additional time in prison. He was not going to do.
Well, I think everybody. You mean they initiated, or I mean everybody?
Well. I mean, I would say that the U.S. government, you know, there was no movement on this, and he's just claiming that it would sounded like the U.S. government was the one who pushed for a resolution to end this.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
Actually.
Well, the U.S. government could have lost. So hey, this is a way to save face.
Well, I think, they lost. The U.S. government lost no matter what the outcome.
Yeah.
This is really about choosing.
John, thank you for that. And I think you're exactly right. Now it's a little bit more clear to me why the U.S. government lost, and the U.S. government lost so much because they've been exposed. Again, the U.S. empire is exposed. I don't know if 10 years ago I would have looked at this way. It's like, hey, you're jeopardizing national security, but my various red pills along the way of what the U.S. government is, and now I know it, and now other people are waking up, and now all it's done is bring attention to the things that Julian Assange shared. Now it's just bringing attention. You know, he said a lot of things about 9/11, 9/11, you know, and I think more than a majority of the country now don't believe that official narrative. And that it really was just a false flag designed to control, demonize, and get more government power, which had happened. It lied us into phony wars. And so now what I'm hoping happens is that people take a harder look at why the government was so mad at this, why they were so livid at this. So we'll pick up here and see if we hear something. Julian's wife here, what she's got here.
Look, I think today we celebrate Julian's freedom. Today is the day that the plea deal was approved by the judge. I think it's also a day where I hope journalists and editors and publishers everywhere realize the danger of the of this
U.S. Empire.
U.S. case against Julian that criminalizes, that has secured a conviction for news gathering and publishing information that was in the public interest, that was true, that the public deserved to know. And that precedent now can and will be used in the future against the rest of the press. So it is in the interest of all of the press to seek for this current state of affairs to change through reform of the Espionage Act, through increased press protections, and yes, eventually, when the time comes, not today, a pardon.
I think a pardon would be excellent, and that's absolutely right. We need to take a hard look at the Espionage Act, and I think it needs to go. I mean, it's a clear violation of the First Amendment. But again, the espionage protects those in power, and yeah.
I think freedom of the press is in a very dangerous place. It's
God, yeah.
It's not evidence that it will move towards more protections, but rather less.
Correct.
There needs to be a conscious and joint effort to push back, and that pushback should have resulted in the dropping of the case against Julian. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. That would have been the only good outcome for the press in general, if the U.S. government had abandoned this case entirely. Now you have the press in a as vulnerable position as Julian has been, and that came the day the indictment came down. Let's be clear about that. That didn't come down with this conviction, and frankly, that mobilization should have happened years ago.
Yep.
And that's what enabled the conviction.
Essentially, she's saying that the press turned on Julian. They didn't defend him.
Unite to push back against this precedent, because it affects all of you. It affects your future ability to inform the public and to publish without fear.
And I would go further. The press, for large part, has protected the U.S. empire. Protected, and we know why, because most of the press is just paid by the U.S. empire.
But what I can say from the phone call with the Prime Minister this afternoon when we landed is that he is delighted that Stella and Julian are both now in Australia, and And we certainly hope that at some point they'll be able to meet.
Does Julian plan to keep going with WikiLeaks and publish more documents or documents?
Look, he just arrived in Australia after being in a high security prison for over 5 years and how long? 72-hour flight or something like that. It's premature. Julian has to recover. That's the priority. And the fact is that Julian will always defend human rights, will always defend victims. He's always done that. And that's just part of who he is. He is deeply principled. And he remains deeply principled and unafraid.
Stella here in Spanish, please.
Thank you very much, everybody.
So there we are. Wow. Wow. Incredible. Incredible. I think that's over then. I think a fantastic charge, not that I actually think is directed at us. Really, in a way, we have a small audience, but we are part of the press here. And, John, I really think that, what she's saying here is we need to just expose what's going on with this government of ours that really is out against us. I mean, I think that's the point of what Julian Assange is there. The U.S. government is our biggest enemy. The U.S. government is our biggest enemy. And boy, they don't want you to say anything about it. They just want you to go along. Now, John, I don't know. Would you agree with this, or where do we go from here? I would say.
Well, I mean, I think I tend to see this, far, far more broadly than, the whole issue of press freedom, which has been mostly the way this is discussed. Obviously, the freedom of the press is very important. And oddly enough, the prosecution of Mr. Assange is proof positive of why you need a free press, right? In other words, by charging this guy at all, if you close your eyes, right, and you imagine a car stuck in a ditch, right, and the back wheels are spinning and you can't get it out.
Yeah.
So the analogy here is that by charging this guy, paradoxically, what they did was they demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt of why a free press is essential.
Right.
To any society. I mean, you just can't put this kind of stupidity up, right? So we have that, that general issue. And I would agree that, the freedom of the press is extremely important, because what you can see, when this started to come down on Monday, what I did was, as you may know, I read a lot of newspapers. What I did was I put up on Twitter links to various articles, the Washington Post, the New York Times, to show you, for anybody's, there aren't that many people interested in this, but for those who are interested, to see how the comments differed, from one place to the next, largely based on their view of, the righteousness of the U.S. government and this sort of stuff. I mean, you go to the Boston Globe, for example. I don't think I was able to tweet that in a way where people could see the comments, but you can't make it up. You got all these people there talking about how this guy's a criminal and the U.S. shouldn't have done this. They should have continued the process. And then you got some more enlightened comments, say at the New York Times thing. But then, when you start to get outside the United States, including even the Toronto Globe and Mail, interestingly, which is not very far outside the United States. I mean, you start to see, much more nuanced comments and that sort of thing. But my point is that, the media obviously has a huge influence on how people see things, what's right, what's wrong, what's an issue, what's not an issue. And it's pretty clear that U.S. media generally operate in a way to support the U.S. government on this. So first point is, no doubt, the prosecution of Julian Assange demonstrated why you have to have a free press. So
Absolutely, yeah.
That's the first thing. Second thing that I think is critical here, and why I see this far more broadly, This is far more than a prosecution. This is an extradition. Okay, this takes place in the context of an extradition, where the U.S. is using an extradition treaty with the UK to try to extradite an Australian citizen for conduct that happened neither in the U.S. nor the UK, right? And that, of course, is a gigantic problem. When this this thing started to unfold on Monday, I listened to a fascinating Twitter, what do you call these things, spaces or something, these conversations that are on Twitter. And one of the things that was detailed was, if you can imagine this situation. So what happened was that a British woman made some comments on Facebook about some guy who lives in Dubai's wife. She lands in Dubai, okay, and she's arrested. Now, okay, so she's arrested for things she did outside Dubai that would not have been, a criminal offense at all, right? Where they were made. So, I mean, we see this, this whole problem of, trying to apply laws in sort of an extraterritorial way, which is a huge problem here. And the third thing that I see about this is, I mean, forget the extradition. Forget Julian Assange for a minute. I mean, what country in its right moral mind pulls out a 1917 law, the espionage, I mean, to go after somebody they like? So, it's like, if this were talking about, U.S. citizens abroad, we'd say all roads lead to renunciation. I think here we'd say all roads lead to the proof of the absolute insanity and disconnectedness of the U.S. government.
Right on. They dusted off the law that was intended to hey, are you a fan of the Kaiser? Hey, we're coming after you. Well, they dusted that off like, look at what we got here, huh? You don't like what we're doing.
I mean, it's extraordinary, right? And then we have, they talked about in a press conference, and this is a very real concern. The total vindictiveness of the U.S. government, that, there had to be a guilty plea on something. I mean, we saw the same thing in the Meng Wanzhou extradition, this thing, and, coming out of Canada. No, you have to plead guilty to something. Well, nobody believes that Julian Assange was, really pleading guilty to anything. I mean, it's just, part of the deal to get out. But,
yeah,
as his lawyers point out, now we have a journalist or somebody, okay, having pled guilty, to, this is not intended to be a pun, but it might sound a trumped up charge. And that's a dangerous thing.
It's incredibly dangerous. And, really, if you think about it, well, what was the consideration in this case? What was the consideration? My early in my career, I did a lot of work with pleas of guilty. And I know a bit about it. And plea agreements are like contracts. They really are. They're really like contracts. And so in order to have a valid contract, you need to have valid consideration. But if you're making someone, the consideration in this part was to plead guilty for a non-crime. Really, it was a non-crime that you're pleading guilty to, or a crime that can't possibly be constitutional. So I do wonder what's going to happen in the future, and I do think a pardon will be coming. I do think President Trump will be elected. It does seem like he's going to win, and it does seem like he would pardon Julian Assange. He is not one. He's not one of these people who is claiming he's the enemy of mankind. I mean, and that's really the thing. The U.S. government's not just claiming he's a bad dude, but like the worst dude. And for them, he is a mortal. He has been a mortal threat to their existence. And now their prosecution of him has only highlighted how out of control the U.S. empire is.
Well, yeah, it certainly has done that. No doubt, and that may be the bigger point. But again, because all this discussion, I think, by the way, that the Julian, we'll call it the Julian Assange movement, right? All these people have been discussing and supporting him, for the years. I think make a big mistake in minimizing what's going on here by talking about this only in the context of journalism. I mean, I think the extradition aspect is every bit as bad, and I think this pulling out this, 1917 law that was for a different purpose. I mean, it's just, it shows you why. It reminds me of the
Oh,
tax
God.
code, right? I mean,
Yeah.
how in the world do we get, I just finished a submission that, Seed is writing for the U.S. Treasury thing. I mean, how do you get from foreign trust rules that are designed to prevent resident U.S. citizens from, setting up a trust in the Bahamas to hide? I mean, how in the world do you equate that, to some U.S. citizen living in the UK who sets up a UK ISA, right? I mean, it's the same, principle of, absolutely idiotic overreach, right?
And if you followed our channel, we just talk nothing of how the U.S. government invents laws, interpret things that are clearly contradict what they were meant to do. They will invent authorities they don't have. One big one, John and I have gone over this a lot, is the FBAR. Hey, look, there's a penalty you have to pay if you don't report your foreign bank account over $10,000. Well, if you actually look at the authorization statute, it doesn't say that whatsoever. Rather, the regulations make the law, and the courts just go along with the regulations because, well, it's just a little too complicated for them to understand, or whatever reasons. I don't know, but I can tell you those regulations are not authorized by the actual law. But hey, look, the courts are the ones to decide. So who am I, right? Who am I? Just looking at the plain language of the statute.
Let's find a way to generalize this problem a little bit. And I thought about this when I was actually putting together this, this presentation. Thinking about these rules, these penalties, all this kind of stuff. And I had, I think, for me, an unusual moment of clarity. Where I realized that, in any kind of, political legal system that follows rule of law, what you would want would be penalties for clearly described, specified conduct, right? Okay. In other words, the only way somebody's going to have a penalty, right, is if it's for doing something that is clearly defined as being wrong, right?
Okay.
Now, you can have a definite penalty, for something that's clearly defined as being law, or you can have an indefinite penalty, perhaps a range or, a discretionary penalty, right? But you look at the way the U.S. laws work and everything, and the problem, to get to the conclusion here, is the U.S. does not have penalties for the breach of specified laws. The U.S. has very, very definite penalties for unspecified conduct, okay? Definite penalty for unspecified conduct, right? For example, right, we look at the, this whole problem of these foreign trust rules, right? Nobody knows, why is it.
We don't know what a foreign trust is, by the way. We really don't know.
Right? That's my
Right.
point, right? There's no way to know if you have one.
Right.
Is you're going to have a 30% penalty or whatever it is. That's my point, right?
And John, thank you for that. That's beautifully stated. And the problem that you have is these are definitely consequences, and you will get a different opinion. You will get a different opinion depending on who you ask, and somebody who might know a lot too. And so that's a perfect illustration of how indefinite it is. When you're trying to get clarity of like, well, what's my penalty exposure on this? Did I do anything wrong in the first place? And it's so difficult for, it puts us in a difficult situation when people are asking, well, do I need to do this or not? It's like, well, if you followed the law, you probably wouldn't need to do that. But what we have, and what we really have, is we don't really have laws. We don't have judicial review. We don't have a meaningful review. Everything is just, there's so much to it that the courts just assume, all right, the IRS is doing it, and the courts are in it at as well. I honestly agree.
So what we have are draconian and very definite.
No, stop that. I'm going to stop you right there. No, draconian would be a massive improvement. How dare you use the euphemism of draconian, John? How dare you use that euphemism? It is so far worse than draconian. It's a new world. We have to coin a new phrase.
How about this, Anthony? Instead of the sword of Damocles, the sword of penalties.
The sword of penalties. There you go.
You like that?
All right. Hey, look, anything. And we're not going to tell you exactly why. We're just going to leave you in fear that these things may be dangling for something you may do. So you better hop in line, and hey, we tell you to do something, you better do it. Something is sort of the terror, and I think that's the when I talk about the financial terrorism, people say you're going too far with that. You're going too far with this financial terrorism, but no, I'm not. And essentially, John, you're saying no, because it's like, okay, definite penalties for uncertain conduct. That is financial terrorism. Plain. That is, because you cannot be sure whether or not you did the right thing or not. You can never quite be sure whether or not, well, they may take a different interpretation, or they may do this, they may do this. And we can't count on the courts to even look at these things. We can't even, and honestly, the courts do seem to be a bit of controlled opposition as well. They definitely seem, they are on the team of the U.S. empire. They are the same team. To look for justice from them, it's very difficult. And we saw the decision in Moore come out last week, and there might be some good in it, but overall, what it does add is it adds more uncertainty. Again, more uncertainty. Everything that the government does is more uncertainty, because that uncertainty confuses us. And then eventually we give up our hands. It's like, okay, what's the worst thing that could happen to me? Okay, I'll just give them my money. I have to ransom more than I am legally, than I might be, I have to ransom myself more than what's legally required, because it is so intentionally confusing and expansive and ever changing.
Yeah. Well, and we know that, and I think what's interesting, one of the things that's very interesting about discussing these issues, in this podcast, the IRS Medic platform, is that we're able to draw analogies, right, and see similarities between tax laws, extradition laws, which we've done before, right? And, and what the tax code really is, right? But I think that the notion of, and this is why I do not believe that, the United States is particularly a rule of law country, okay? Because, there's no, people don't even know, they don't even know what the law is. The only thing people know is that they can be penalized if somebody, doesn't like what you're doing,
And yeah, exactly right. It is right. We are beyond, the United States of America is past the rule of law.
Yeah. It's what it is. It's more of using laws under the veneer of, well, it's just the law, right?
Oh yeah.
To
Follow
go
the law
and punish people, right? For this, that, and the other thing. I'm not drawing any direct analogy here, so don't misinterpret what I'm about to say. But there's absolutely no question that the evolution of the Nazis, it was all incremental and under law. Okay, they never did anything that was against the law.
Well, when you're defining the law, right? That's the thing. When you're defining the law, and they are, and really, and this is the thing. Exactly. The problem is this, John. The whole check on this out of control thing is supposed to be the press. This is where it's most important, and this is where they attack those. Well, we really can't let people know what we're doing. Government's real. Oh, no. So again, the U.S. And by the way, if you're joining us live, thank you so much. We have a lot of people today. With me today is John Richardson, the great John Richardson, and we are discussing Julian Assange's release from jail and really the next steps for the U.S. empire. The U.S. empire being revealed for what it is. We're talking about and John really made up a great point of what the U.S. is. It's this, that we know there's penalties. Those penalties are certain. They certainly exist. But how do you get penalized? What's the conduct that's going to lead you to penalties? Now, in the realm of taxation, this is where it gets crazy. And if you have foreign income and assets, this is where it even gets crazier, that you cannot adequately predict when you will be penalized or not. And it also depends. And look, and I'll tell you this, the IRS changes. They change their determination on what kind of penalty to assess you very clearly. And I'll give you the example. If you are someone who is 80 years old, suffering from dementia, has a few $1 million in a bank account, and you didn't file a FBAR form, Okay, in that case, I will go to appeal to say, hey, look, this guy didn't know anything about it. That money was overseas. It was all income earned overseas. He didn't know about the FBAR reporting requirement. In that case, complete unknowledge, it would be something that's non-willful and no real damage to the U.S. Not a lot of damage to the U.S. government. In that case, I could tell you what the government, you can appeal that case, and I could tell you what they're going to do. They're going to uphold a 50% penalty on that gentleman because he's elderly and he can't fight back, and the IRS wants a press release. I can tell you this: the same exact fact pattern, except one thing: not 80 years old, 35 years old, has all the marbles. Guess what the IRS is going to do? They are likely not going to assess that penalty, assuming you're lawyered up and can fight back, because the IRS doesn't want a fair fight. They do not want a fair fight. They just want to use these penalties to terrorize you and to terrorize others and to say, okay, well, this requirement doesn't appear illegal, but if I don't do it, I could be ruined. So guess what I'm going to do? And this is what happens every day. People are forced to pay more in compliance work than they should because the government doesn't want to have certainty. The government doesn't want to define the certain things that will lead to the penalties. Rather, they leave it to vagueness. And we've seen in the tax industry, and I've been part of it to a degree, the tax industry makes up the law. The tax industry makes up makes up what things are. Foreign mutual funds. There's nothing from the IRS that says a foreign mutual fund on its own is a passive foreign investment company or PFIC. But in its absence and now no clarity, and this is the thing, the IRS won't put that clarity on the website. Very simple. You could just say, hey, look, foreign mutual funds on their own are not mutual funds. But they don't want to do that. They don't want to do that. They want to create that uncertainty. Maybe you have to overfile a little bit. Maybe, and of course, with the PFIC tax regime, a lot more in taxes, right? So they're not going to come out there and say, whoa, we don't want you. We don't want you to pay more than taxes. So let's just clear this up a little bit. Rather, they want to intentionally confuse you and intentionally confuse the entire industry trying to manage this thing. It's just, it's like and that is beautifully. And so, John, I got to just say, I love your summary on this. We have certain penalties for uncertain conduct.
Yeah. Obviously we spent a lot of time talking about this in the context of taxation, but I think it might be a good moment to point out that, yeah, absolutely. But that's a symptom of the much broader problem of, I often think back to, Reagan's 81 inaugural address where he says, well, the United States is a people, it has a government, not the other way around.
Yeah.
And, what's happened, of course, is that, the U.S. government is extraordinarily oppressive. And U.S. citizens abroad, I think, see it more clearly.
Yeah.
And feel it more harshly. And it's like I was having a discussion with somebody a week or so ago, and I realized, I thought this might be, a good thought going forward, that only Americans abroad, I think that you actually have to have been an American abroad to fully understand the oppressiveness, right, of the U.S. government.
Right. That's, yeah. Or represent them as well. Then you see it firsthand. It is.
Yeah. And I mentioned this on the context. I was talking to somebody who is, is having marital problems over these issues, basically. And, I said to him, look, you're going to have to stop talking about this with your spouse, because they're never going to understand it. They may understand the pain and the fear that you're feeling, but they're never going to understand the issue. And, and then I added at that point, this was the context, that only a U.S. citizen abroad can really understand and feel the oppressiveness of the U.S. government, in terms of these tax rules, et cetera.
Right. And again, here's a great comment from Melvin right here. Melvin, thank you so much for this, right? The U.S. could be a rule of law country if the Supreme Court would do its job to throw unconstitutional laws. Instead, they find arcane reasons to uphold clearly unjust, brutal, unconstitutional laws. That's a factual statement. And then I think my next question on that is why, Melvin? Why? Because you're absolutely right. They do that, but why? Right? And it's because I think in these uncertainty that they create, it also creates more power, right? By being wild and crazy, which is what I would say the US government is who wants to confront that crazy individual who's throwing around their arms ever? Maybe you'll be fine. And they don't take up that much, but really they're all over the place. And yeah, well, I think, yeah, you have it right there, Melvin. It has to do with the history of the U.S.
Problem with these judicial appointments, right? And this is a very real problem. Well, the first problem is that they're there for life, basically.
Yeah, that's a problem.
First, there ought to be term limits.
Right.
On this thing, but they're used, to try to get predetermined outcomes on certain issues, right? I mean, I think it's entirely. I appreciate I'm in a minority in saying this, but I think it's entirely inappropriate to be vetting a judicial appointment on what their view is on abortion or something, right? And this is what we're getting, right? So we've got politicization, if that's a word, of judicial appointments. And this is a problem, but I think a good first step in ending that would be, I don't think that a member of a political party ought to have the jurisdiction to be able to make these appointments, right? If all they're going to do is choose a judge, to further, the party doctrine or something like that.
Well, John, I think you're making me think of a challenge, and I'll just say this: that I actually, Justice Jackson is somebody who's younger than me, right? She's younger than me. She's been practicing law for, I think, fewer years than I have been. And so that's the first time that's ever happened, because usually it's someone with more experience who's been doing this a while. So I actually kind of have sympathy for her. My question is like, well, what does she know? What does she actually know? And what do I actually know about the U.S. tax code? I know parts of it, but I can't tell you I know everything about it. And I mean, how unfair is it? How unfair is it to throw a U.S. justice, U.S. justice, your U.S. justice of all U.S. law along with the tax code? And I mean, the tax code is so that alone can't be understood. So really, I think maybe one of the root causes of our issue is that we have far too many laws. That the Supreme Court has far much to do.
Yeah,
and
there's no doubt about that. The U.S. is a society. Well, I think, in fairness, most Western democracies, but the U.S. seems to be not only is it more law heavy, but I don't know to what extent this goes on in other countries, but I can tell you that in Canada, it's the statute that basically rules, okay, not the regulations, and this sort of stuff, right? So not only do we have, a lot of laws, but we have this, this delegation of the interpretation of them to the executive branch, the Treasury Department. So, I mean, they can change this here, there, everywhere. I think further increasing the possibility of weaponizing this stuff, right? But, I mean, so we know we got a problem, okay? It's a tyranny of laws, and the content of those laws is certain penalty for uncertain conduct, okay? I mean, that's where we are, all right? And the question is, what can or should people do? Now, to get back to the Assange thing, and this is why I think Assange is more of a symptom of the problem. Yes, to be sure, his prosecution demonstrates why a free press is important. But I think there's a bigger story here, actually. And, I sent you, an article this morning written by Chris Hedges, who's, been really devoted to this cause for a long time. But I mean, his point is that, I mean, I don't think that the Julian can ever really win here, but I think the U.S. government lost. Okay, but why? Well, it was because the mobilization of, a large number of individuals who cared about this issue, all over the world, that eventually, eventually I think began to, I think it forced the British courts to conduct these hearings in the light of day and not in a dark basement, etc. In other words, they knew, the judges who, whatever ruled that he was going to have the right to appeal surely knew that the world was watching on this. And I think that surely that, held them to a higher degree of accountability. So the point is that people do matter as long as they state their views and take principled positions. And this is a great victory for, mobilization of, small people who care.
Yeah, and I just put in the link to the article that John was referencing, and I'll just put this up on I'll just put this on a screen share right now. Here it is. You save Julian Assange. You can find the link to this, and this is a pretty good. I just was briefly reading it this morning. It's a pretty devastating indictment of the U.S. government.
It is that. But let's forget the indictment of the U.S. government for a second, and we've done enough of that for today, I think. Right?
I don't know about that, John. But maybe
let's
move on. We have other things to get to, though, right? We do have other things to get to, right?
Into
yeah,
it.
there we go.
And that is that. Okay, the U.S. government lost. I don't think. How can anybody say Julian won after 14 years?
Right.
But I'll tell you who did win. Okay, were small activist groups who, came together to eventually, create a situation where the U.S. government had to back down, and I think contributed very much to at least a realization on the part of the British judges that what they were doing. People were watching, right? This was not going to be just, blah, blah, blah. So, that's important. And that's important, for a lot of reasons. One is, of course, the whole citizenship taxation issue, in fact, and stuff like that. And it shows you that people can make a difference, but they have to understand they can make a difference. They have to decide to make a difference. And those are the clear winners, right? This is a winner for anybody who believes that small people coming together can achieve things, right? That's where the clear victory is here.
That is, I guess, just the persistence, and honestly, and I think Julian Assange. I don't know. I kind of do look at him as a winner. I do actually look at him as a winner because he held out against intense pressure, and he stuck to his guns. He stuck to his principles. He paid the price. But that sticking to your principles is perhaps the greatest victory you could have. To stick with no matter what the pressure is. And that's where I think, I think history will remember him as a true hero, and hopefully as that spark, that issue, that launched, a tidal wave around the world, cleaning the world of all this filth of this government taking over everything. And that's really what we need. Everybody has a part in this. We all have a part in this. Look, we're a small podcast, but I think we have some really big ideas that we discuss here, and in a way that really makes sense of it, of making sense. And we use the tax code. I think maybe the tax code is that literal and actual allegory of what the U.S. government actually is. This is a perfect example. What kind of government would create a tax code, and even beyond? And this is the thing, when you say, John and I have said, and not jokingly, the real Constitution of the United States of America is its tax code, because no matter what the Constitution says, if the tax code says something different, the tax code will always win. But it's actually somewhat of a not actually correct to say it's the U.S. tax code, because of these uncertain things that John just mentioned, these regulations that will create penalties out of things that aren't penalties in the statute, and additional interpretations of what these things could possibly mean. So this is why I think I found, and I would say that the real benefit for me for starting this channel years ago. Look, I started this channel just to maybe get revenue for my company. I was a tax resolution company, and I said, hey, look, talking about these issues, people explain to people, hey, this is what's going on here. You could solve it. And, YouTube has been wonderful to me in really helping my firm grow and helping me grow. And now I've merged into a larger firm. So it's been wonderful on that. But what's happened to me is on that, as I paid attention to actually what's going on, now I've become one of the fiercest advocates for the complete removal of this U.S. tax code, because I see how awful it is and I see how it actually operates. And that's why we really, that's why we say, look, do you really understand a country? To really understand a country's value, take a look at its tax code. And here the U.S. government is exposed as the greatest monster, the greatest, most terrorizing force on the planet, and the planet has ever seen. And I challenge you to find something to disagree. And I could show you where you are probably wrong when we look at what the U.S. government has done. And again, some of those things that Julian Assange revealed that maybe our government, like I think maybe 40-50% of people Americans now believe the U.S. government was 100% behind 9/11, used it, terrorized us in order to pass laws and to go to war to happens to be the enemies, the top enemies of the people also believed in the attack on 9/11. That is Israel. Not to say it's the Israelis themselves, because those elections also, I believe, are stolen. And it's only certain members of them, just like in our government. It's not Americans. They don't represent Americans. Our government doesn't represent Americans. And I don't expect that Israel's government represents them as well. But rather, these two small little parts, get together to say, hey, look, guys, we can get more control if we work together. And that's what's truly frightening, is when you look at what Julian Assange actually shared, the conclusions reached are shocking. And honestly, and I would say even for me in my various red pill moments, I've had days where I couldn't sleep. I've had days where I couldn't sleep when you are confronted with the truth of what the American empire is. It is absolutely nauseating. And I'm more impressed by Julian Assange. I am so impressed by what he did, that he actually did it to begin with, and then he stuck with his guns. He actually stuck with his guns. And now the world, I think he did change the world, because it's all out in the open now.
Yeah, I think I would add that the people who surrounded him, his lawyers, his family, deserve a huge, huge shout out here. They stuck with him all the time. Particularly, I don't mean to, I just want to identify one, which isn't to say that more important, but, his father toured the world, basically, trying to get support for the release of Julian. And, I actually briefly met, had the opportunity to shake hands with his father in Toronto at the screening of a movie. But, it's all these sort of small, the unsung heroes of life, let's put it that way. He surrounded himself, with so many unsung heroes of life who stuck with him, certainly his wife, his lawyers.
Absolutely.
But
Wow.
I think, even more importantly, as immediate family, made this a project. So, I mean, there's a lot of good takeaways from this for sure. And I really believe that when the history of the United States is written, this is going to be more than a footnote.
It's going to be more than, I guess, as we say, it depends on who writes the history, because, right now the history is written by the victors who have victory over us, right?
Writing that history.
Yeah, but that's why we want to really examine some of the things that go against that narrative. And, I know we're running out of time here, and really, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We've had an incredible amount of views today, incredible amount. And so I know there's a lot of people, this is the first time they're watching us. Thank you so much. And what I would would suggest is that you do subscribe to our channel, follow us on Twitter. There's really a great community that's growing. It's a really great community that's growing, and people sharing their stories and exposing what it is. And really, our job is also to convince the people around us, because we are in a minority. We do follow these things, and most people don't have the time to do this. So really what the critical thing is to, just mention these facts. And when something comes up that is, and I think this is one thing, when somebody says something that is the official narrative BS, you know what? Just ask some questions about that. Just ask some questions about that to say, well, how do you know that's true? Get other people to start asking these questions, because look, all the empire has, and this is all the US empire has, is lies and deceit. If we remove the power of deceit, the US government has nothing. And these people have nothing. They only can exist through getting their lies through. And what better way to get your lies through is something as complicated and indecipherable. And what would I say is the word here? Changeable, mutable. That's the word, mutable. It can be changed. The US tax code to be changed for whoever the enemy is. You can say, hey, look, this thing is so big. We can find something to get you here. For the most part, I'm surprised Donald Trump has not been prosecuted for tax crimes. I'm surprised they couldn't find something on him. So he must have an incredible tax team there. So John, what would you say going forward? I'm going to, just mention everyone, be sure to subscribe to us, follow us. And really, we are the new media. We are the new media, a lot of little outfits like us. We're all doing the same things. And if you are somebody who thinks you'd be a good guest, please reach out to me. Let me share you my email. This has just sharing my email has done massive things for me. This is the email aparent@irsmedic.com. If you there's think that I should know, if there's something that you want to expose, please reach out to me. I want to share your story about what has happened, how the U.S. empire has really gone above and beyond. In your case, to be more U.S. to you. Please reach out to me in particular areas. Any lawyers out there as well with that knowledge. Please, love to have you on there. And I guess if Julian Assange's attorneys want to be on here, I guess we'll welcome there. And also Julian Assange, if he would want to be on the show, I'll leave that to him. So there you can find my email as well. John, you have a quote about if you are a U.S. person and you're thinking about maybe you don't want to be a U.S. person anymore because the U.S. tax code is just making your life impossible. What would you be your advice to somebody like that?
Well, at the present time, all roads lead to renunciation. And I would add now, it's been a terrible, it's funny. On the one hand, I feel that individuals are better positioned for change than they ever have been. But the problem is that there just isn't the support for change.
Yeah.
Okay, interestingly enough. And I think that, anybody who's, over 50 or something, who's a U.S. citizen living outside the United States would, in general, serve themselves very, very well by getting rid of U.S. citizenship. That said, though, it occurs to me, we've been talking about this morning. The one thing we haven't talked about that I think we ought to mention before we sign off today?
What's that?
Think about it for a minute. What have we not talked about? I'll give you the answer.
All right.
What we have not talked about is Julian Assange released videos that showed what? Apparently the U.S. military massacring civilians.
Yeah.
So there's another layer to this, right?
Yeah, and I was only focusing on the 9/11 evidence, but you're absolutely right. But I think that shows like, well, if the government is capable of slaughtering innocent civilians in the most despicable act of cowardice, would that same government create a phony terrorist attacks, blame other people for a justification to go murder innocents? And I think the answer is, well, that seems like they're very consistent. Very consistent.
The point here is that the real, that one narrative here that has, I think, long been forgotten is that really, I mean, let's imagine, okay, that Julian Assange had, released a video of U.S. Army soldiers going door to door to provide first aid kits and things like that, and food and water, they would have loved that. Okay, but I mean, it was simply being, caught on, out on this.
And that's all what was caught, right? And that was the only thing that was caught. How much more of that
Oh,
happened?
obviously. Oh, I mean, obviously.
Wholesale.
But I mean, look. So the U.S. spends 20 years in Afghanistan and eventually leaves.
Hmm.
The U.S. spends 14 years going, or I don't know, maybe 5 years, 6 years,
Whatever it was,
Yeah,
whatever.
Julian Assange. Eventually they leave. I mean, like,
Okay.
how long is the U.S. just going to go out in the world, blow some things up, cause trouble, and then realize, well, we'll just leave,
Well, no, I don't actually think they leave, John, because they never left Europe. The United States of America went in there for reasons for, the start of World War II might not actually match the official narrative, but the United States government went to Europe and then stayed there and is still there. Again, the European Union is 100% an idea of the United States government. The Office of Economic OECD is 100% controlled by the U.S. Europe itself is still controlled by the U.S. And so the U.S. goes in there, does all these terrible things in order to launder monies to its friends, but they stay behind. The military may leave, but the America is still there. And the American law is everywhere. And then the America has their assets in these countries that agree to such things as to signing on to FATCA because, hey, what's the choice? So that's what we really have. So John, I don't really think the American government ever leaves the countries they invade and destroy their civilians. The whole purpose of it.
Right. You may be right.
The whole purpose.
Sort of talking with you for the last whatever hour, absorbing the stuff over the last few days. Anybody who thinks that the issue here is just Julian Assange clearly has limited imagination.
Yeah.
That's clear.
And
great news for Julian Assange.
Great news for Julian. And I just, I guess I should put a plug in for some revenue here. I am Anthony Parent. I am a 20-year tax attorney. I've been doing IRS Medic for, I don't know, a long time with my dad and I. We started this firm together. My dad was a medic in the 142nd Medical Clearing Company, which was in Iraq. And we have some war stories for sure that don't make the government look so well. Anyway, we decided on a medic because my dad and I, we went to law school together, graduated together. We started this firm together and we started getting into tax resolution, helping people with problems. And we thought, hey, IRS Medic, getting people out of harm's way. Well, that has led to a huge business and many, many people interesting. So we do help people. Look, as much as I see the empire for what it is, we don't want to put our clients in harm's way, but we do advocate for them relentlessly, which is what you have. Unfortunately, it does work. It does work. If you lawyer up, the IRS backs off, unfortunately. So if that's something you're interested in, you have some tax issues, we do have a special, we do specialize in international taxation. You can reach out to us at irsmedic.com/offshore, whether you need your tax filing, your tax returns just filed, or a lot more is going on, problems all over the place. If you want a firm that really is going to stand on your side, I am now at Thaveau and Partners, a Swiss firm, you right there, but you can still reach us at the great IRS Medic location, irsmedic.com offshore. And please, if you have any issues, just reach out to us and we can help you out. So with that, I want to thank the great John Richardson. I mean, really some incredible insight there, John. And I want to just reiterate the gem you left us with there. The gem you left us with is that this is what the U.S. empire is. Very certain penalties for uncertain conduct, financial terrorism. There we go.
Yeah, I think that's an objectively true statement.
That is, and oh, by the way, I didn't put John's email there. If you are thinking of renouncing there, I don't know if you could go to any better place than John. You could reach out to him at citizenshipsolutions@proton.mail.com. Obviously, a gentleman who is truly on the side of the individual and staunchly opposed to the forces that look to destroy us. With that, I am Anthony Parent of IRS Medic, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you in the future.